So what else do we got going here? Well, I knew I wanted to add kind of like these police lights that we talked about earlier, especially towards the end of the shot. So what I did on that is, again, I showed you the kind of the really silly police light rig that just kind of spins. It's like 4 lights spinning. What I did is I wanted to make sure that the police light ground illumination pass that I rendered separately was going to fit. And again, this is what I talked a little bit about earlier before. If you want to change the lighting, or especially add lighting to something that's already 3D rendered, just add that one light, rip out all the other lights, and make sure that everything else in the scene, as far as the geometry, has a very matte black set to it that doesn't show any specularity, doesn't show any reflections, and then you could just simply add that pass right back in. So here is the actual lights itself, and you could see that the lights are kind of flashing across the ground, and I really overexposed the hell out of these lights because I knew in post I'm going to bring them way down, but I didn't want to have to drag them way up, because if you drag something way up in color correction, odds are you're going to get a lot more noise. So when in doubt, I overlight. I kick the exposure of the camera high, or I just blast the illumination a little bit higher and then bring it down in post, and it won't be as noisy. But as you can see, my skeletons are in the scene, but they're just rendered black. So is the ground plane. And then I just blurred it. I brought the exposure way down, as you can see, added a multiply over here. And all the multiply is doing is it's basically saying on frame 390, you don't see any of it. And as we get closer to the full blast of intensity here, it's basically my version of a fade out. Really, it's all it really is. And then I plus that in. So there is the police lights on the ground, and it's barely noticeable, but there it is. There is the blue lights, and it'll make more sense once, of course, the the skeletons are in there and stuff like that, right? Now, what comes next in our comp sandwich is, of course, the ground shadows. And again, I rendered out the ground shadows separately. Here is the raw render of the ground shadows, right? And I didn't really care about what the RGB channels look like on this guy, because all I'm really interested in on this, of course, is the specific AOV that we talked about earlier. That is the shadow mask, which looks like this. Okay, so that's the shadow mask. That's nothing more than a render of the skeleton shadows on our holdout ground plane, right? Because obviously they weren't in the original footage, but they need to have shadows on the ground where the HDRI light is coming from, right? Now, of course, these don't look like real shadows because it's white over black. Shadows render that way, probably so you could see it compared to black over black. So you just simply invert it, right? And then I blur it to kind of give it a little bit more of a feeling of it's kind of integrated into the world, into the ground. Again, the lens distortion on top of that. And then if all shadows, of course, just like what we talked about earlier, are multiplied in. And I multiplied in something at like 80%. So there's our skeleton shadows, right? Nothing to. Let's jump over to our skeleton right over here. I showed you this earlier. Here's our skeletons, right? That's the raw render. And then after all the multi-channel compositing, there they are here. Looks pretty much similar, but just tweaked a little bit more to my liking. And then what I wanted to do is have the eyes glow a little bit more, right? So the eye glow, I just took this kind of intense green, and I took the AOV of all the eyes, like here's a couple of eyes right here, right? And I just basically merged those together, so you have the green of the eyes, a little bit of defocus, and then these glows here, if you look, I like to layer my glows in 3 parts. If you add just one glow, it's going to look like right out of the box everyone else's glow. And glow really doesn't do this kind of uniform linear spread into whatever, into transparency. Glows should respect the laws of light. And the law of light actually should adhere not to some linear fall off, but to the inverse square law. And we're not getting into the inverse square law. Again, it's in the lighting and rendering course. But what that actually means is it's really intense near the source. Then it's got a fall off that is basically a logarithmic curve. Okay, it's not a straight fall off. So that's what I built with the lights here. So that's a tight glow. There's a medium glow. There's the wide glow. I'm just adding these lights together, and it gives you kind of a different feel to it. And those little details are pretty important. I brought it in very subtly, 0.015. For adding it in as it's a glow, so it's a light source, so I'm plussing it in. There's our lens distortion that you could see more of at the edges of the screen. And then voila, our skeletons are now in the shot, right? Of course, they need the police lights on the skeletons. So there's the police lights basically just brought in clamped, blurred, multiplied, brought down. There they are right there.